I'm Justin Poulin. Joining me, Suzi Collins, Brian Bartel. And at the time of recording this, we're not exactly sure when it'll get produced and sent out there, but we are heading into the holiday season. So we're still in the midst of, some IV solution shortages, and there's been lots of conversation around that. But we're at a point, too, where people start to go on some vacations. You're trying to get things done. If your hospital's fiscal year is aligned with the calendar year, this is a really big time. And at the same time, we all want to make time for our family, our friends, enjoy the holidays, and people feel the crunch. And so we thought we'd take a different approach to the episode today, even if it airs after the holidays. It'll still be recent in your mind, and maybe you'll draw something from the discussion, which is, how do you navigate a typically extremely busy time of year? Sometimes there's a decent amount of add-on cases too that like pop up from trauma and et cetera, as we kind of finish out the year, and maybe people aren't always being as safe as they could be. And you're trying to balance that with also, making sure that you have quality of life, for your own personal life. So Brian, Suzi, I'm excited to have this conversation because it really does get super busy this time of year. And yet we're all working after hours these days, it seems.
100%. It's also everybody, well, a lot of people do inventory in October, November. So we go into our inventory in November. So it's not only that you've got all the holidays hitting, fall breaks have happened, but then it's inventory time, and there's the work of counting, and then there's all the fun data work that we get to do post inventory. So it is definitely a challenge. And then for us here in Arizona, we also welcome our winter visitors back. Usually even in October. This year it won't happen till after the election. But yeah, so we get our influx of winter visitors as well.
And that's a good reminder too, Suzi. Another thing that we've really, I would say, maybe not necessarily struggled with, but something to be aware of, shipping times with the extreme rise in online shopping. I mean, all of that's competing for business too. So those are the conversations that we start having at the facility too. Hey, remember, even though it used to take 3 to 5 days ground, now with the inclement weather, with all this, additional shopping holiday craziness that's happening, aware that we see increased lead time. So again, just a side note, but something to be aware of.
Oh, 100%. And then we, of course, have weather delays, right? So any weather type issues that could affect shipping. And then this year, with especially Christmas landing on a Wednesday, it'll be very interesting to see what companies do in terms of how they're going to close. So some may close up to, 3 days because of the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday for the holiday. Some may even just choose to take off that entire week. So I think it's going to be an interesting year this time, just the way the holidays are hitting this year.
Yeah, one of the beauties of Thanksgiving is it just sort of lines up, right? And some organizations give you Friday off, some don't, but every single year you can count on it on Thursday. But it is interesting, when Christmas lands smack dab in the middle of the week like this year, not a lot of, and typically you don't always get, Christmas Eve off either, right? Like when I worked as a nurse, I think most organizations, that's not a vacation day. And so when Christmas falls in the middle, like a lot of people take vacation on this cycle versus like when it kind of matches up with the weekend. And so even if there's 4 work days, because it's not piggybacking up with the weekend, a lot of times people are using their PTO and it ends up being a down week for everybody, whether you're a supplier or healthcare provider. Do you guys do anything around like the scheduling of cases? Does your surgical procedure schedule lighten up typically that time of year, or is it just same volumes straight through?
I think a lot of what drives that is, quite honestly, what our physicians are doing, right? So you're always going to have trauma, but if your physicians are taking time off, and I think again, just because of the way the holiday is going to land this year, I think that we will see some of that. And it's funny because you mentioned kind of the year end. I booked a foot surgery for December 27th because I'm trying
Yeah.
to get in before my deductible, right?
That's right. The deductible usage is a big factor for
Yep.
the
So
consumer.
that is going to make things busier. But again, it's kind of strange the way the dates are going to land this year. How about you, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously it's the busy time. People have met their deductibles. They're trying to get in for a bunch of surgeries. But to Susie's point, it really depends on the physician schedules too. I would say usually during the week of Thanksgiving, historically, I think we've seen a little bit of a drop off, and then the same thing during the week of Christmas. But it's really kind of just dependent on what's happening at the facility and how busy the surgeons want to be too, right? I mean, they're trying to maximize everything that they can do in this time period as well.
We also, I'm going to take this another direction too, because that's, very much kind of the logistics and what's the staffing model and what are some of the, unique challenges this time of year. But let's just talk about it from a management, standpoint too. We have, healthcare supply chain week in October, and we do a lot to recognize staff, but there's also, staff want to have some parties. They want to not only, be able to have work-life balance at home, but a lot of times you want to use that as a time to celebrate, especially in a great environment where everybody's working well together and the team is close knit, and a lot of times they want to do some parties. How do you handle, like, some people get really big ideas about what that party should look like, and you've got a budget to manage, and also it sometimes can create a little bit of a stir and hurt feelings depending on how it's organized. And, these things kind of come into play. Like, do you guys have, something that you do standard with staff around the holidays? And do you have like any sort of guide rails, around, what those parties look like? Or do you kind of just let the staff roll with it?
You want to go first, Susie? You want?
No, I'm going to let you go first,
So,
Brian.
without sounding like the Grinch, I've just never been one for work parties. At the end of and everybody's motivated by something different. So we have a little get together. I know some organizations will have like after hours events. Sometimes that can be fun. Me personally, it's like, you know what? I want to do a good job at work. I want to be able to support them. I want to have those relationships. But I also feel like, especially during the holidays, having time with your family is important. So I'm probably not the best person to ask because I'm not motivated by such events. And so again, we do have a little get together during the holidays, and it's a lot of fun. But I'm not one of those that really goes out. And again, I kind of leave that up to the staff. And if they want to do something, we always open suggestions. We have comment cards that we do for our staff, and that was how we had a potluck last year. Because somebody said, "Hey, I think this would be fun," and it was really good. But again, on the day to day, and again, I don't know if I would consider that a fault or not. It's just never been one of my strong points to keep track of birthdays and anniversaries and all of that. It's important, but it's just something that I am not strong at. So,
Yeah, and during my operations days, we would always pick a Wednesday around the holidays to do a potluck, and that was traditionally, it was always a potluck at Christmas. People like to cook, show off their, skills. It'll be interesting this year with the remote team. What does that look like? What can we do for fun? What can we do to kind of show that togetherness? Because we also always traditionally did this game where, and my manager was awesome. She would have a prize, but it would be wrapped in like 8 different boxes, all with wrapping paper. But you got to take a turn trying to unwrap it with oven mitts on. It's hilarious. It's a lot of fun. We would laugh. So I'm like, gosh, what am I going to do, like, from the remote perspective this year to celebrate differently? But it is an important time, and it's a time to obviously say thank you. But I think the biggest thing that we can do for our staff is make sure that we're aware of the schedule, aware of request, manage it so everybody feels like they're getting their equal time off. And, in my operations days, sometimes that meant I was the one working, I didn't mind that because it meant that somebody else was going to get the time off. And I think that that's important to all of us as leaders, is to help our staffs feel valued during the holidays and not like they're being, forced to work.
Yeah, that competition for PTO
Oh yeah.
is real. And that can be, I'd say, from a management perspective, it's one of the most difficult things. I've done both, Susie.
Mhm.
Prior to having young kids, I was the one working, on every single holiday as a nurse, right? And didn't even matter if it was a Saturday and it was a holiday, I was working. And but I kind of knew, look, I'm going to get paid a little extra, and I'm going to get the holiday pay. And I knew that a lot of my coworkers had young kids, and it just seemed like this is the stage of my life to sort of contribute to that. But then I also didn't feel guilty when, I then had kids and said, I can't do it. I remember this one job I had, I worked a lot of like overnights, for extra hours. It was like an 11 to 7 shift. And I remember, one year my kids were super young and there were some other coworkers that needed time off, and I wound up working 11 to 3 a.m. And then I came home, we took a 2-hour nap, and then, did all the morning stuff with the kids, And then after that, I was like, that's as far as I've taken this. They started to get older from there. And I was like, but to your point, I think it's helpful when, the employees sort of kind of understand where they're at and what their availability is. Some people are really great at that and some aren't. And some are just like, no, this is my holiday. It doesn't matter what my personal circumstances are. I have the exact same right to PTO as anybody else does on this team, right? But if they're all putting in a request, do you guys manage it like first come, first serve? Do you try to talk through things a little bit? Like, because, the early bird, if they're always getting the worm, it really doesn't matter. It can still create a problem.
Yeah, I'm pretty fortunate. So we've got 15, 16 people on my team. And what we've really instilled in the last 4 years is, teamwork, collaboration. And so most of the time, by the time they've actually formally requested it, they've already worked amongst themselves. Hey, can you cover this? Are you okay with this? Again, I'm super fortunate because my team is very caring in that sort of way. I spent 8 years in retail before I moved into healthcare, and there's blackout dates. And just like you, Justin, I'm trying to think, I don't think I ever had to work Christmas because we were closed, but I worked Thanksgiving or just all these different crazy hours. And again, in the healthcare setting, obviously there's teams that need to be there. And it's a little bit different. The other thing that we've done is restructured and just been more efficient. And so usually now we're closed on the major holidays. So we figured out how much stock we have, how much is going to be used. And we've proven that over the last couple of years that it's not going to shut down operations if we're not there. So taking those steps too is really important. And again, having the conversations with staff. Hey, if you guys don't want to work on these holidays, let's figure out a way to make sure that we have enough stock on hand. And it's worked really, really well. And staff
Are you
are
on
part of
call
that
as a
solution.
manager? Are you on call as a manager in that scenario? Like if somebody really does have to go in, is it you in that scenario?
Theoretically, yeah. I can't think of a time that I've had to go in. We've obviously all of our house coordinators, nurse supervisors are familiar with our warehouse. They know how things work. And so it's very rare. But yeah, there's times that I've had to go in, but it's very few and far between because remember, a healthcare setting, we're not 24/7 in the materials supply chain department. So they're used to that. They know how to go in and get supplies, write things down, do all of that. So being closed for a day when they know that the floors are stocked appropriately, there's always going to be odds and ends that they've got to go get, for random requests. So it's worked well.
Yeah, and I was going to say operationally, same thing. We would kind of basically treat that holiday as what we do on the weekends, right? I think the bigger challenge is that person that wants to go be on the holiday and you end up with people out on the other side of it. And then you're having to do heavy stocking. And again, just like this, where you're going to stock heavy on a Tuesday for Christmas and then come back and be getting ready to stock heavy for the following weekend. So, and I think we just would start planning early. We would start talking about it in September, not wait until last minute. Because, and we did always do blackout days for inventory. We basically said you're not off the last week of October type of situation. And we don't like to have to say that, but there's also, work that has to be done. So seniority can play a role. Obviously if 2 people, 3 people want the exact time off, seniority will sometimes come into play. But like what Brian said, a lot of times they kind of have those discussions on their own before they're actually making the request. But we just try to keep that dialogue open. But I think the other piece that'll be, again, interesting is for things like buying, right? You're also going to want to be planning ahead that week before Christmas, because if there are a lot of companies that choose to close Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of that holiday week, you're going to want to make sure you've placed the orders that you need so you have things coming in. So it's a constant what's next. You know, what does next week look like? You can't live in the moment in supply chain, right? You always have to be looking ahead.
Well, next week looks like New Year's. And so when it falls on Wednesday,
and another
you've got
Wednesday
the
holiday,
same
right?
problem the very next week. So it's,
100%.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. It's kind of like when maybe Christmas falls on a Monday and then New Year's falls on a Monday, you might have the few days in between where people take time off. But when you've got that Wednesday, it's like this extended, it's almost like spread out over 2 full weeks instead of like a week and a little bit. And so, this Wednesday fall is definitely interesting, but great conversation. Oh, go ahead, Susie.
I was just going to say again, I think it'll be interesting to see what companies are going to do around the country, because that's, like I said, that's another big piece of it.
Yeah. All right. Excellent. Hopefully this will air before the holidays, but if not, or either way, pin this one for next year and watch it in September. And I think, I think having these kinds of conversations, I love what you said, Susie, about planning ahead. And thank you both for joining me for another episode here on Power Supply.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.